Welcome into Rounding the Bases, the podcast about culture and leadership with a baseball twist, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust, hashtag no stopping you. Enterprise Bank and Trust was founded by entrepreneurs with the core focus of serving privately owned small and medium-sized businesses who have a story to tell. Enterprise Bank's commitment is to listen, learn, and guide clients to a lifetime of financial success. Enterprise Bank, together, there's no stopping you. My name is Joel Goldberg, coming to you from the Kansas City Audiovisual Studios. They create engaging spaces. Check them out at kcav.com. My guest today is Michelle Wimes. She is a thought leader, inclusion specialist, global citizen, social justice advocate, speaker, author, and the new Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer as of September 2020 at Children's Mercy in Kansas City. Nationally renowned presenter on professional development, diversity, and inclusion issues in the workplace. And now she has brought that, after practicing law for 14 years, to a totally different world. But isn't every world right now one that involves diversity, equity, and inclusion? Michelle, thanks for joining me. And I'll say a belated congrats, at least to my audience, with them listening, to your new position. My question first and foremost is this, because when you and I talked maybe a couple of months ago, a month and a half ago, you were still trying to sprint to get all of this adjusted and transitioned. Are you still in sprint mode?
It's starting to calm down a little bit. I mean, the first 90 to 120 days, which I just passed the 120-day mark last week, was super, super busy, because I think in that first 120 days, I met with over 200 people in person. I hosted 4 community listening sessions and had about 70 people or groups or organizations participate in that. And then I think I've done at this point about 15 different presentations to departments and divisions within Children's Mercy. So if you can just imagine, nothing's in person anymore. So it's just like Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, doing all of that. So yeah, I hit the ground running, and it's been busy, but it's kind of calming down now a little bit.
It's interesting too, because in the role that you have, and I think not for anybody, but certainly an executive with so much on your plate, to make that transition in the middle of a pandemic is just different. I mean, there's a lot to do one way or another. I remember when I had Peter Clune, the CEO of Lockton, in, and here he is getting ready to lead a massive insurance company or broker, and he's doing it from home or by himself in the office on Zoom calls like you. And that has to be one, we have to adjust. I mean, you don't wait for this to end, but that had to have been a truly unique task for you. And in your case, going to a totally different field.
Absolutely. It has been a challenge. It really has been. And, in this business, DEI is as much about building relationships as it is about doing the actual work, right? And so it's hard to build relationships when you can't sit across from somebody and look them in the eye, or have a coffee, or have a lunch, or have a dinner. And so you just do the best that you can. And like you said, flexibility rules the day. You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to meet people where they are, and to do it in the context of the means and the mode that you can do it in, which, for Children's Mercy, that's Teams. We have Microsoft Teams. So a lot of stuff got done via Teams. And then occasionally people would stop by my office who were actually working in the hospital. And so that was really nice. Every time I had the opportunity to kind of sit down face to face with somebody and talk to them, I really enjoyed that.
There's a lot to that I want to discuss. The first is relationships, which I believe are important in every profession. I say this over and over again, that I'm not a baseball reporter or a baseball host. Yes, I am, but really not that much more than you are a hospital employee. Right. It's about relationships and people. Right. Mine in the case of bringing those personalities into interviews and to the camera, yours in terms of DEI. And so you could go and work in any profession, whether it's in the medical field, whether it's in the law field, whatever it is, and it's still about relationships. How critical has that relationship building been for you?
Oh my gosh, throughout my career, relationships have just been key. You've got to, especially when you're coming into a new organization, to get your credibility going, to establish your brand. It's all about those one-on-one relationships from day one that you're building. And it starts with the CEO, right? The top person. And then I report directly to the chief strategy and innovation officer. So it's building that relationship with the top executives, while at the same time building the relationship with the managers and the frontline leaders who are actually helping you to do the work on the ground, because it's not the executive suite that's hiring the day-to-day folks. It's not the executive suite that are training people, that are advancing and promoting people, deciding who gets to stay, who's really engaged with the work. And so I love the fact that I get to meet with and interact with and develop relationships with the people on the front line as well. And so there's so many people here at Children's Mercy who are new like me. So I'm not the only person who, just started in the last 120 days. We have so many people who are in the same boat. And so I really enjoyed getting to know them, as we have all kind of been inculcated and trying to learn the Children's Mercy culture and what Children's Mercy is all about. And we're kind of learning it together as we go. And I love that. So it's been great. And I will tell you, it's one of those things where you just don't know when you're coming into a new culture. Will I be able to build my credibility again? Will I be able to build solid relationships with people? Will people get me? Will people like me? And it's a worry. It's one of the things that I was worried about when I was trying to decide, do I want to make this transition? And it's just, I tell you, it's been refreshing coming into an environment where it's such a values-based organization, where we know, like, the mission and the vision of Children's Mercy is to create a world of well-being for all children. I don't know if I could have told you what the mission and the vision was of any law firm that I've ever worked for, right? Except for the bottom line of making money. But here, you know what that vision is. And so people are connected to that, and they're passionate about that. And that, I think, helps me to be able to build relationships, because right away we have something in common. And that thing that we have in common is being passionate about making sure that we're providing the best, most excellent patient care and service every day, every single day.
That's so interesting too, because it's not like lawyers, in whatever end of that you're in, are lacking motivation, and maybe the purpose ends up being who you're representing or a certain cause. And so certainly you had that definitely in the DEI field, but this seems different. It sounds different what you're describing too. Now suddenly you jump in and you are part of a massive team. And I think it's interesting too. I mean, Michelle, you are a very accomplished woman and a very accomplished professional, but yet there's still that human nature of walking in and saying, am I going to fit here? How are they? As you were just saying, how long did it take you to kind of wrestle with that and trust yourself too?
Yeah, I mean, probably the first 30 days or so. I mean, because there's so much to learn. You forget. I was at Ogletree for almost 10 years, right? So it had been a really long time since I had to orient and onboard into a new organization. And so that means learning the systems and the way things work, and learning the structure and the way, learning the policies and the procedures. And so it took me a little bit of time, I think, to find my footing. And I would say about 30, 45 days, but I'm rocking and rolling now. I mean, it's good. I am enjoying every day. And it just seems like all the pieces of the puzzle are coming together now. Like we're getting ready to launch our first ever hospital-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment, workforce assessment. We've never done anything like that before. And so I'm so excited. It's going to launch on Monday. And I just feel like all the pieces are coming together. We've got a great national consulting outfit that we're working with that their specialty is in healthcare. And I just feel like, the folks that have been instrumental in helping me both inside of Children's Mercy and outside of Children's Mercy to help make this, to help bring this to fruition, it couldn't have been done without the relationships that I built. So I'll give you an example. The person who introduced me to David Hunt, and David Hunt is the guy who's leading our hospital-wide assessment. David is a former recovering lawyer like myself. He's out of Minnesota. I met David through Ryan Patrick Parker. Ryan Patrick Parker is the Chief Diversity Officer for the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. How did I meet Ryan? I met Ryan through LinkedIn. because of my, just my connections. And he saw when I got my job at Children's Mercy, and he reached out and was like, hey, I'd love to touch base with you. And we had a conversation, we hit it off. And so as I was doing the research and trying to figure out, okay, well, who should do our climate assessment? And, we sent out an RFP and all of that. Well, Ryan was the person who gave me David's name. And of course, we went through a whole formal process, but it's through relationships. Again, that relationship of getting to know Ryan and getting to know, what worked for him at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. And it's just, I don't know, it just gets reinforced to me every day, the importance of relationships.
Well, you're speaking my language too, because, and I remember when you and I talked, it's like there was a lot of terminology and language that you were having to catch up on, because look, what's going on in the hospital is not quite the same as what's going on in the law office or in the courtroom or whatever it is, but the language of relationships is the same. We talked a little before, good mutual friend of both of ours, Andre Davis, is as good at building the relationships as anyone I know, to the point where, to me, the best people at that, you don't necessarily even know what they do for a while. They just build the relationship and the rest comes later. And so it's clear to me that that's what you're doing. But was this, I'm guessing it's not, but was this in the plan, or what ended up getting you here? Not the relationship that happened, but now you say recovering lawyer. Was this like, oh, I got to get out of here? Or did something pop up where it's like, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to shake things up a little bit?
Yeah. No, this wasn't in the plan. I mean, Children's Mercy wasn't in the plan. Ogletree Deacons wasn't in the plan. Go back before that. Shook Hardy wasn't in the plan in terms of becoming a diversity director. I mean, I think you announced in the introduction, I was practicing law, and I was very happy practicing law. And I did that for 14 years. I mean, when I went to law school, I thought, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, right? This was my career, it was my vocation. It was something I was dedicated to and passionate about. Until one day I wasn't, right? I just got tired of arguing over what I perceived to be things that we shouldn't be arguing over. I felt like there should be more common ground in my relationships with outside counsel and with other my peers. And I just felt like we weren't coming to amicable solutions with some of the cases that I was working on. And I was just beginning to get more and more frustrated. So I started looking around and thinking, what are things that I can do that I'm passionate about, that I love, that still connect me to law, but that I'm not actually practicing law anymore. So I guess you could say at a certain point after 14 years, yes, I was intentional. I was deliberate about, I need to do something else. Like I can no longer spend my time and energy doing something that I'm not passionate about anymore and that I don't find meaning in, which is the point that I had gotten to. But yeah, so when I decided to do that, that's when the opportunities just kept rolling in, right? And so I had practiced law at Shook for I think 5 or 6 years. And I was what they had called, and it's funny because they say this all the time, that I was a regrettable loss. I left the firm because they didn't have a way to make partner as a part-time lawyer. I had had my 3rd child and I wanted to go part-time, but I still wanted to be on the partnership track. They had, back then, there was no way that you could do that. Either you were full-time and on the partnership track or not on the partnership track at all. So I actually left and went to Spencer Fane Britton Brown, another law firm, as the first reduced hours partner there. And so that was wonderful. And so, then I went back to Shook when that opportunity came available to be a diversity director. I went back to Shook after having practiced law there. And it felt like home because I had been there. I knew the people, I knew the culture, I had relationships with people. And so it was wonderful to go back in that kind of position, in an administrative position. And I really enjoyed it. And then from there, I was there at Shook 3.5 years and then went to Ogletree, where I stayed almost 10 years.
Let's talk a little DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and
Sure.
well, not a little, let's talk a lot about it, because I think that it is a discussion that is, first off, one that everybody should be having. Second, it applies to everyone too. I was reminded recently, I had some guests on, and a gentleman by the name of Jim Atwater, who is running a company, and the short of it is he's deaf, and he talked about the discrimination that he always dealt with, being one of the smartest guys, but they wouldn't take him for medical school and all of this type of stuff. And now he's making a big impact. And he talked about the the lack of inclusion for someone that might just be lacking hearing, yet he's one of the smartest guys out there. So this encompasses so much. It's not just race, although if it were just race, that would be more on our plate than most people can handle. It's so much more than that in terms of race, in terms of sexism, in terms of all types of discrimination. And how big of a hill as a society do we still have to climb?
Oh my gosh, we still have a huge hill. I feel like it's, you've seen that cartoon with this guy pushing this big rock up a hill, and they call it the Sisyphean effort, because you push it up and then it rolls back down on you, and push it up some more and it rolls back down on you. I feel like we have so much work to do. I was just talking to one of the doctors here at Children's Mercy, who happens to be differently able. He has cerebral palsy, and he's been a doctor for a number of years. And so we talked about the fact that even with the COVID-19 response, we talked about the fact that people with disabilities are being left out of the conversation.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when they talk about who gets very early on, when doctors were making life and death determinations and determining, well, who would get a ventilator and who wouldn't, there were some states who were starting to pass not necessarily laws, but guidance, regulations about resuscitation and about who gets a ventilator. And many times it was people who had mental disabilities who were ineligible to get ventilators, right? People who had physical disabilities. And these were things that have actually happened in the last few months, even with COVID-19. So we were talking about that. He sent me a number of articles about it. And I was appalled because I did not, and here I am a DEI expert, but I did not know that our brothers and sisters with disabilities were being disproportionately impacted in the way that COVID-19 is being handled. I don't know that that's the same case with vaccinations, but I know that that was the case very early on when they were deciding who to treat and who not to treat. So you're right. It's not just about race and ethnicity. It's not just about gender and sexual orientation or gender identity. I think people forget about the disabled community, and people who are differently abled and capable. And so that those folks get left out of the conversation quite a bit. And you talk about accessibility here. How easy is it to get into the hospital, to gain access, even as a working physician, right? He and I talked about some of those issues yesterday. So I think it's an uphill battle, but it's one that I am passionate about. It's one that I have hope that as long as we are willing to intentionally and deliberately engage in these conversations, increasing people's awareness about what the issues are, that we'll be willing to develop a plan of action and strategically attack it, because we can only start to address the deficiencies and address the wrongs by having the conversation. One, being aware of what the issues are. Two, deciding, okay, well, what are the parameters or the things that we can put in place to address those things, and then moving beyond the talk and actually doing it, developing a plan of action and actually doing it.
To me, it's overwhelming because there's so much to tackle. And of course, this isn't just something that popped up today, but it does feel like right now, more people are paying attention. Now, you look in the wrong places and it feels like no one's paying attention,
Right.
but it does feel like, and I don't know if it's because of COVID, if it's because of the attention that the George Floyd murder received and the protests. I mean, everything kind of bubbled up at the same time, but yet and you know this as well as I do, that our attention spans and the news cycles that reflect those attention spans can move on to the next thing and whatever the shiny object is. And it feels to me that it's people in roles like you have, or even that I have for that matter, people with platforms that have to continue to shine a light on this and have those discussions. And so I'm curious your take on that, how you continue to move the needle in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that you have to recognize when you have a platform, and you have to be willing to be courageous and use that platform to talk about the ills of society. And it's hard sometimes because people, like you said, it's a news bite one day, and then the next day people have moved on and they've moved on to the next thing. But here you are, especially when you're somebody like me, that this is the work that I'm doing. This is what I believe God has called me to do. So it's not just a news bite for me. I don't just move on from it. And so I'm constantly reading and educating myself, constantly having one-on-one conversations with people, constantly trying to figure out how can I get these issues in front of people who may not have considered it in the way that I consider it, and have people just kind of maybe have that light bulb go off where they think, oh my gosh, that's interesting that Michelle approaches it from that direction. I never would have thought of it like that. So I'm constantly, Joel, putting stuff out on LinkedIn. I'm constantly putting stuff out on Facebook, even putting stuff out on Instagram. And it's funny because one of my girlfriends said the other day, we were in a book club and we were talking about Ibrahim Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And she said, oh my God, she said, I didn't even know that my teenage daughters knew you, but she said, I was encouraging them to follow you on Instagram. And they were like, oh, Mom, we already know who Michelle Wimes is. And I was like, that is the biggest compliment, because most kids, you know what I'm saying? They're not necessarily following 50-plus-year-old, women. But again, or men for that matter, but it's a matter of figuring out what works for the audience that you're trying to reach, and how can you communicate in a way that can bring some light and understanding to the issues of the day, whether those issues are police brutality, whether those issues are racial discrimination, how to be an anti-racist, how to, social justice issues, whatever they are, and I just try to use whatever platform I have to do it.
I have to follow you on Instagram now, which I'm going to click that button and hopefully you will accept it later. It's Michelle My Bell Insta. But I follow all your stuff on LinkedIn because I just think that you put out so many engaging articles or thoughts, and so I learn from that. Or sometimes I see something and I say, oh, wait a minute, I need to read that. And so I don't need to encourage you to keep doing that, but I think that every time any of us in a higher profile role have that ability to share with others, that maybe it does help start that discussion. And that's at the bare minimum, I think, the responsibility that we have, whether we're in DEI or whatever it is. And so, or not. But I ask this question a lot, and oftentimes I've asked it to guests or friends. Often they're both friends and guests of color. How far have we come? How far do we need to go?
I do think that we've come a long way. Like I'm listening right now to Barack Obama's book. Is it The Promised Land? Whatever his latest book is. I listen to it on audio, right? So I'm listening to it on my way to work and on my way home. And when I think about the fact that we have had an African-American president, right, of the United States, and now we have our first Black and first South Asian vice president and female vice president of the United States, I feel like we've come a long way. I mean, to have that happen in those big historical moments, it's something that we can all be proud of. But does that mean that we are post-racial? Does that mean that we are post-gender, where gender doesn't matter, where race doesn't matter anymore? Absolutely not. We still have so much work to do. And so when you think about January 6th and you think about the Capitol insurrection, right? And all of those folks who showed up at that Capitol to interrupt the election process, to interrupt the final moments of saying that, we're going to move forward with these two candidates on our ticket for, president and vice president. That was a very sad moment to me. And to think about 70 million plus Americans who stood strong with a candidate for who, a president, basically, not a candidate, but someone who for the last 4 years has spewed so much hatred and division in America. To me, that shows that we have so much further to go, because you have a big group of people who said that was okay and who felt like, and still wanted to invalidate the election results. And so as hopeful and as inspired as I am by Kamala Harris and her election and by the cabinet that President Biden is putting together, which is one of the most diverse cabinets that you've ever seen in the history of our country, that gives me hope. But at the same time, I know, and I'm a realist, that we still have a lot of work to do. There are still a lot of people who have not bought into the fact that whether you are Black or brown or woman or man or gay or straight, that you should have the same rights as they do.
Unfortunately, politics gets in the way, and that's to me the heartbreaking part, and the challenge of it is this should not be Democrat versus Republican. This should just be about decency and humanity. And then I'll talk to some people that say, well, I've always been a Republican. And it's like, well, that's fine. But does being a Republican or Democrat for that matter, or whatever, independent, whatever you are, does that entail racism? Does that entail hoping for people to struggle or being against certain people? And so I think, politics can be so dangerous to talk about, certainly for someone like me that, sometimes I feel like Michael, well, I never feel like Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan used to say Republicans buy sneakers too. I get it. We've got Royals fans, and I want all Royals fans to watch us. But what I want more than anything is people just to treat each other well and to treat each other equally. And if we could somehow get past left or right, I mean, if you want to argue over policies in terms of beliefs, and okay, have that argument, but there's so much more to this. The other thing too, and I just want to throw this out there to you because it happens every day. I saw a tweet the other night. It was from my counterpart in St. Louis. I don't know her well, but she does what I do. She even filled in for me a couple of years ago here in Kansas City when I traveled overseas on a USO tour. And she was reporting on the St. Louis Blues hockey game. And this guy tweets her and says, "You looked better than the other evening when you didn't have the big fake eyelashes on. Keep up the good work. Let's go Blues." And her reply was, "Brian, this ain't it, my dude." And, I don't know her well, although I respect her work, and we work for the same people. He then sends a tweet out the next day to her, which just drives me nuts, that says, "My apologies for the tweet last night. My phone was left in the break room at work and someone must have messed with it. The tweet has been deleted," which is total BS and garbage, first of all. But I think the part that really bothered me about that, and look, I'm lucky enough that I don't deal with a lot of that. I deal with people that just want to vent to me on Twitter, and it doesn't have to do with, they might not like my work. They might give me a hard time about something, whatever. But what she deals with as a sports reporter is what women deal with in my profession every single day. Now, they don't deal with it in the locker room like they used to. That's gotten better. They're still dealing with it with society, which is one of the dangers of social media because it shows people's true colors and they can hide behind it. But I think what kind of bothered me about this one, Michelle, is that this guy wasn't hiding behind some egg of a Twitter profile. I actually don't think he knew he had done something wrong, or the excuse that he let somebody else, on his phone have it. I mean, there's a picture of him and his wife or significant other on there wearing their Blues jerseys and all of that. And it was a reminder to me of, one, what women have to go through in a lot of professions, including mine, but two, the ignorance out there to not even know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, here's the thing. You don't know what you don't know. Right? And so when you think about that kind of person who would do a tweet like that coming into the workplace, right? Who does he work for? Who is he interacting with? Who does he supervise? Who does he have authority over that he can determine whether they get a raise or whether they get promoted or whether they, get fired from an organization? That's the thing that's even scarier to me, is those biases that come out about the way somebody looks that determines how capable somebody is, or how smart they are, or how ambitious they are. And so that, to me, is the issue when you're linking somebody's physical characteristics with what the expectations are with regard to who they are or what they're capable of or what they can do. And so it all starts with education, because we don't know what we don't know. And maybe he didn't know that that was offensive, and that is scary, right? So it's a matter of education. I'm so big on education and teaching people to understand, what bias is and what bias breakers are and how do they interrupt bias, before, because the bottom line is we all have bias. I'm not sitting up here saying that I'm
Sure.
perfect and I don't have bias. Every single one of us has bias for or bias against people or ideas, what have you. But the challenge is, how do you interrupt that bias so that it does not disproportionately impact people who are in underrepresented communities, people who are minorities or women or people of a different sexual orientation or gender, right? So interrupting it so that it doesn't impact somebody's career, somebody's life, somebody's, the way they're living their lives. That is the challenge, is interrupting it and not letting it disproportionately or negatively impact your relationships with others.
There's progress. The Miami Marlins hired the first ever female general manager in baseball. We now look out and we see female officials in football and basketball, coaches in basketball.
I saw that.
I still think, it's at a point. I remember when I was growing up, and I grew up outside of Philadelphia. I'll move on to the baseball theme questions in a sec, but this just popped into my head. I remember growing up outside of Philadelphia when Randall Cunningham became their star quarterback. But before he became the star quarterback, he was the backup to the superstar, and they'd bring him in on 3rd and long to run plays. And it was like, you recognize that's the black quarterback. And of course, the underlying, prejudice or thought there was, well, then I guess that means they're not smart enough to handle it or something like that, right? And we don't think twice about a black quarterback anymore. Not with Patrick Mahomes, not with Lamar Jackson, not with, you could rattle off the top 10 best quarterbacks in football, and it's going to be a really good balance. With that said, why are they still not hiring a lot of black head coaches? So again, these reminders every day that there's some progress, but yet we're still not seeing very qualified people, whether it be race, whether it be sexuality, whether it be gender, whatever it is, based on who they are, or they're not being hired based on their qualifications.
Yeah, no, that's true. And do you remember the Rooney Rule? You didn't see an increase in the number of African-American head coaches in the NFL or even assistant coaches in the NFL until they put the Rooney Rule in, right? And the Rooney Rule basically increased the applicant pool and said that you had to have minority coaches as part of the applicant pool before you made a final decision on who you selected as the head coach. And so once they did that, there started to be just a increase. And I want to say it was something like 18 to 20% of an increase, like in that first year. And then it, kept increasing after that. So to me, what that says is, it's not that they weren't qualified. It's not that they weren't out there. It's just that our biases, people who were in charge, their biases were getting in the way of even bringing those people to the table. Because once those people got at the table and were allowed to compete, they competed and they ended up getting a lot of those jobs, right? So it is, like I said, removing the biases, which again goes back to education. You have to know what your biases are. You have to know how they show up, and you have to be able to interrupt them so that they don't have the negative impact like that, where you're not seeing the numbers and you're not seeing people in head coaching positions. You're not seeing people in quarterback positions and things like that.
So much to digest. And
yeah.
I say this to a lot of my guests, it certainly applies with you too. We could go hours and hours on this. Of course, I'd make the rules, we could, but you're a busy woman too, and I want to be able to get you back to work. So let me get to the baseball theme questions, brought to you by Kissick Construction. Trusted team, reliable partner. Check them out at kissickco.com. What's the biggest home run that you have hit in your very now long and successful professional career?
If you had asked me about 120 days ago what the biggest home run was, I think I would say building a professional development and diversity and inclusion program from the ground up, which is what I did at Ogletree, right? Came in and built it from scratch and, built a solid team, built a solid diversity ecosystem, and very proud of, right before I left, that I was able to see people who started out in our business resource groups move into positions on the board. So we had our first African-American woman who was promoted to the board, our first Asian-American male who was promoted to the board. And these were people who were very active in our business resource groups. I saw our CEI index, our corporate equality index that measured LGBTQ equality when our policies and procedures go from a 0 when I first started 9 years ago to 100%, right? In the last 3 or 4 years that I was there. So I would have said it was that. But on reflection, Joel, I would have to say it's making this bold move from the legal industry to the medical industry. I think that's probably the biggest home run, especially today in the middle of a global health pandemic and in the middle of what I call a racial reckoning or a racial pandemic. It's like a double whammy. And so to be able to change, to be able to pivot and to come into a new industry at a time such as this, and to be able to, really make meaningful change in a way that impacts our local community here in Kansas City, I think that's what I'm most proud of. And I think that's the home run for me. And there's so much more to the story, right? There's a lot that's going to happen from this point forward, but I love the fact that I'm here now, and I love the fact that these are the issues that I'm focused on.
Yeah, I was just about to say the home run is still developing because there's going to be so
Developing.
much more to come, which is so awesome. How about a swing and a miss and what you learned from it?
Yeah, so a swing and a miss for me would have been right when I got out of law school. I went to a firm, it's Hush Blackwell now, it was Blackwell Sanders, Matheny, Weary, and Lombardi back in the day. And I made the mistake of thinking that the practice of immigration law at the firm was going to be the same as the immigration law clinic that I did at Tulane at my law school. Because at my law school, I was focused on asylum applications and helping people come into the country because they feared for their lives and bringing their families. And it was just wonderful work. And I was able to use my Spanish language skills. When I got to the firm, that was not the case. We were working on non-immigrant visas. We were doing all kinds of types of immigration law that were separate and apart from political asylum. And as a result, I was bored out of my mind. I was bored. I was making just really silly mistakes. And what happened was the partner who I was working with, because there was only one partner, I was working with her, she started to question my abilities, right? Because I was making stupid mistakes. And as I said, I was just bored. And so then that led to me questioning whether or not I should even be a lawyer and whether or not I should even continue to practice law. So that was the biggest swing and miss. I think those presumptions and assumptions that we make about, the connection between graduate school and what it's going to look like in real life.
And then the last baseball theme question, small ball. That's the book that I wrote, Small Ball, Big Results. What are the little things that add up to the big things in your world?
Yeah. So for me, I think the little things that add up are just the small things like courage, finding your courage in the small moments in life when you're having one-on-one conversations with somebody and somebody says something racist or somebody says something sexist, and finding the courage to be able to speak up in that moment gives you the courage to then later speak up on a bigger platform when they're higher table stakes, right? So that's one small thing. I think gratitude, being grateful and thankful for the people in your life and letting them know that. So often, people do things for us and we don't let them know how grateful we are. We don't let our family members know how much we love them. And so I think just the gratitude is a small thing that ends up being really big for me. And I think too, I was thinking about this quote. I'm a big quote person. I love quotes. I keep them in my iPad and my notes section. I'm always writing down quotes. And Tony Robbins said, our lives are a reflection of our rituals. And I think that is so true, that every day little small things that we do or don't do can add up to what we end up accomplishing in our lives. So I think it's just a matter of being intentional and deliberate about the things that you want out of life, writing down what your goals are, envisioning what your future is, affirming what those dreams are, and then, listening to your inner voice and then trying to accomplish the things that you set out.
The most recent one I wrote down was from the late Hank Aaron. So when he passed, I wrote it down. He said, failure is a part of success. There is no such thing as a bed of roses all your life, but failure will never stand in the way of success if you learn from it. And so that one to me, it hit me because it was very much the second question I asked you about a swing and a miss and what you learned from it. All right, I want to get you out of here, but 4 quick questions as we wrap things up. First question, you got a household there with 2 people that judge and a recovering lawyer.
Yeah.
Who wins those arguments with you and your husband?
I win because I tell him that his jurisdiction ends when he gets on our street. When he gets home, all jurisdiction, his judicial, discretion and everything goes out the window.
I love that. I will make sure that when I have Judge Wimes on, which I would like to, that I ask him the same question. And if he knows what's good for him, he will answer it the exact same way.
The same way, exactly.
I believe that husband, wife, regardless of what you do, that should be the answer, whether husband or wife is a judge, jurisdiction ends, and it's the wife
with
that's going to win that one.
With the
That's
wife.
Right. That's right. At least in my house, I know that that's the way it is. Second question.
Happy wife means happy life, right? Happy wife, happy life.
21 years. I definitely know that one. Second question. You've received so many honors, and I know you're humble, but is there one honor over all the years that has stood out or meant the most to you?
Oh man, I recently received the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association's Sly James Diversity Champion Award. And I would say that meant so much to me because Sly James, our former mayor of Kansas City, was a mentor of mine. And he actually worked at Hush Blackwell when I was there as a summer associate. And so I remember working with him and looking up to him. And so I felt like it was a full circle moment when KCMBA awarded me with that award. And so that really meant a lot to me. And
Third
that
question.
just happened. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Congrats on that and all of them. And love Sly. He's amazing. You know that as well, better than I do. But I'm lucky now, post mayor, that I'm in a group with him, and so we get a chance to see each other on a regular basis virtually. But yeah, I mean, he's amazing. Third question. You posted on LinkedIn about Walgreens hiring a new CEO who happens to be a woman. She came and the first Black woman to be COO of Starbucks. I talked before about progress, and it's still big news that a major company like Walgreens would hire a woman in the top role. Yet progress too. What do you make of that?
When I saw that this morning, I was thrilled because we had Ursula Burns, who was a CEO for a number of years as well. So she, and I was happy about Ursula. But when I saw that this morning, I was like, oh my gosh, this is progress. Like this is exciting. It's exciting to see so many women stepping into powerful roles where they can really impact change. And so at the same time, you're just like, man, it's 2021. Are we still having first? Are we still having, these kinds of conversations? So on one hand, yes, very hopeful and very excited. But then on the other hand, you're just like, wow, really?
Roz Brewer named the CEO of Walgreens. That's the exciting part. The other side of it is she is the only Black woman leading a Fortune 500 company. And so a reminder again of how far things still need to go. Final question, the walk-off. You touched on it towards the beginning of the interview, but working in a place with purpose, as you mentioned, being a part of a team, being a mother yourself, seeing those kids there. I know you're not going from room to room, but you're surrounded by all of this now. It's your world. How inspiring is it in terms of purpose, in terms of what you're doing in life with diversity, equity, inclusion, and beyond? Is it to be able to be surrounded by those kids every single day?
Oh my God, there's nothing like it. Like I've never worked in an atmosphere where you see children and you see parents every single day. So you're tied to your purpose. You're tied to why is it that I'm here? Why is it that I'm doing this work? And so I see so many different kinds of people every single day. I came into the lobby yesterday after I parked my car and was coming in, and there was an Amish family sitting there, right? In their Amish gear, and they had their child with them. And I just remember as I walked past them thinking, man, that's wonderful that we have such lots of different people from different backgrounds coming into the hospital who feel safe and who feel welcomed and who feel like they will get good care here, right? And so just seeing that every day is inspiring. It really is. And it helps me to continue to be laser focused on what I am trying to do for this workforce, for the community, for the patients and families that we serve every single day.
Michelle Wimes is the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer at Children's Mercy Kansas City. Began in September of 2020, a self-proclaimed recovering lawyer. There's so much more to come. I love that about the home run. It's just going up in the air right now. It may not come down, I don't think, for a long, long time. So best of luck. Not that you need it. I know that it's going to be amazing. Already is. Congratulations. And I'm just excited to be able to have had the conversation, to start to get to know you a little bit, and for much more to come. Thanks, Michelle, for spending all the time today.
Thank you so much, Joel. I've really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to developing greater friendship with you as we move forward. And so this has been wonderful. Thank you.
It's what it's all about. It's all about the relationships. So I'm so grateful for Michelle's time. That's going to do it for another episode of the podcast. Shout out to my sponsors, Kansas City Audio Visual, Kissick Construction, and Enterprise Bank and Trust. Businesses often come to Enterprise Bank because they demand and frankly are worthy of more than the status quo and need a local partner who understands their business. Thanks to all of you for listening and watching. Thanks to Michelle. You can find out more about my book or me or any way to get involved at joelgoldbergmedia.com. Thanks, everyone, and catch you next time on Rounding the Bases.